On this episode of This Week in Space, we're talking about threats from above with Jonathan Dagle of the National Space Society. Stay with us. This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by Cisco Meraki. Without a cloud-managed network, businesses inevitably fall behind. Experience the ease and efficiency of Meraki's single platform to elevate the place where your employees and customers come together. Cisco Meraki maximizes uptime and minimizes loss to digitally transform your organization. Meraki's intuitive interface, increased connectivity, and multi-site management keep your organization operating seamlessly and securely wherever your team is. Let Cisco Meraki's 24/7 available support help your organization's remote, on-site, and hybrid teams always do their best work. Visit meraki.cisco.com/twit.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 71, recorded on July 21st, 2023, Threats from Above. This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by Cisco Meraki. With employees working in different locations, providing a unified work experience seems as easy as herding cats. How do you rein in so many moving parts? The Meraki Cloud Managed Network is the answer. Learn how your organization can make hybrid work. Visit meraki.cisco.com/twit. And by Bitwarden. Get the open source password manager that can help you stay safe online. Get started with a free Teams or Enterprise plan trial, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Space, the Politics in Space edition. Bet you were waiting for that. I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Ad Astra Magazine. I'm here with guest co-host Geoffrey Notkin, former president of the National Space Society, star of TV's Meteorite Men, which is now playing again, thank goodness. And Jeff, you're joining us from a galaxy far, far away today, yes?
I certainly am, Rod. I'm quite excited to be seated in the beautiful recording studio of Heritage Auctions in Dallas, where tomorrow we close the Jeff Notkin collection of meteorites auction, hopefully among much fanfare. And gosh, it's nice to be in a fancy studio. I feel like quite the VIP here at Heritage. What do you think? Does it look good?
It looks very nice, and I have to take my hat off to Heritage because I've watched their auctions over the years. I never bid on anything, but I watched them, and they do a crackerjack job. They really
do. Well, I hope you'll bid tomorrow. I mean, surely you want to take a true visitor from outer space back home with you to add some good cosmic vibrations to your home life?
I'm thinking about it.
No pressure.
No pressure. Our guest today, oh yes, we have a guest, and his name is Jonathan Dagle, who has the cool title of Planetary Defense Policy Manager for the National Space Society, and is also the head of their policy team. Hello, Jonathan. How are you?
Hello, Rod. Thanks for having me on today. This is very exciting. I'm a longtime listener and member of the TWiT network, and it's sort of like a brush with greatness to be here today.
Well, a very slight brush in my case, but I appreciate you saying that. If we get Leo on here, the greatness quotient will go up a bit, although we have Geoffrey, so that's good.
I was really talking more about the TWiT network itself and Ant and all the
now it begins.
There, but
okay, now it begins. I knew this.
But you're sort of a brush with greatness too.
Yeah, a very small brush.
That was a fantastic misinterpretation of a compliment, Rod. But I second John. We are great fans of TWiT. They really do a marvelous job. Very professional.
Okay, well, now that I'm picking
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ant.
I'll pick myself up off the floor of shame, and I have a space missive. So I don't really have a space joke this week, but I have a space missive that was delivered from listener Brant Kruger. It's more of a sonnet than a straight gag, so I'll have to annotate a little bit. He writes, "Always glad to hear you make space for your jokes, as every dad tries to amuse their daughters and sons, SUNs. I couldn't plan it, PLANET, but last week's failed joke inspired me to search the web, capital WEBB, and launch a new one. Probably won't rocket, ROCKET, as well as you all, and I hope it's not too nebulous, but here goes. Why did Homer Simpson try to get a beer in space? Because his computer told him to start, use the space bar. Oh, we have a new sound effect. How nice.
That brought a tear to my eye.
Yeah, I'm crawling in the corner.
I
thought that was fantastic. I really liked the witty spelling.
But you always bring a bespoke space joke, Mr. Notkin.
Do I? Well, I've got a space joke and I've got a planetary defense joke, especially for today's episode.
Because that's always a laughing matter.
Okay.
Have to find humor somewhere.
Indeed. So the planetary defense joke first. The Stellar Asteroid Mining and Exploration Company hit pay dirt out in the belt. So why is it that they were unable to bring their extra heavy treasure trove of metals back home?
Why?
Because all of the gravity tractors were on strike.
I don't know. Are they SAG members? How does that?
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
All right. This is my favorite one ever.
Good.
Why did the 16th... Sorry, I beg your pardon. Let me start over again. Why did the 18th century French astronomer get into a fight with his roommates?
I don't know why.
Because he left a Messier object in the sink.
Oh, wow. That's Ant's commentary. Cruel, though it may be. Thank you. Did you
I had
write
high
one?
hopes for all
I
that.
did.
Oh, good. All right. Now, Jonathan, you claimed you had one.
Well, that's true.
This was your best
since
shot.
I've watched the show, I knew there would be a requirement, or at least the opportunity. And
exactly.
Since I'm on with such distinguished with this guest co-host here, I have one just for him. Well, it's not just for him, but anyway. So here's the question.
Oh, thanks.
Where did the astronaut park his spaceship?
Okay, I give up. Where did the astronaut park his spaceship?
At a parking meteor.
Yes! Bravissimo.
Wow, that was easy.
Love it.
At the
Oh, we just
I have another
we just saw the mirror version of Rod there for a moment. He just flipped over into the alternate universe.
Sorry, that was for people listening on audio. I'm hitting them with the ray gun because they deserve it. All right, you rascals. Have we wrapped?
Do you want the other one?
Oh,
yes,
sure.
please.
Got another
Okay,
one.
so I also brought one, another one for this show. What did the planetary scientist say when she was asked why she stopped working on her space probe?
I don't know. What did she say?
She had no comment.
Well, that's good too.
Okay. Hitting the 7-minute mark. Thank you very much, gentlemen. As always, we invite you to join Team Notkin and send us your best or worst fake joke. And don't forget to do us a solid. Make sure to like, subscribe, and all those other podcast things on your favorite podcast player because we need it. So I'm just going to hit 2 headlines today. And I don't know if either of you have had a chance to look into these, but they're not really my normal wheelhouse, so I'm gonna have to do a little bit of reading here. All right, so Dark Matter Ahoy from Scientific American. They were talking about last week's fascinating preliminary result from NASA's James Webb Space Telescope. The potential detection of huge stars far back in the early universe, which is something the Webb has done before. However, these are possibly powered by dark matter rather than conventional thermonuclear fusion, which is what stars do. So this is something that's been looked for a while. Theorists have been postulating this for a long time, in particular in the dense conditions of the early universe that they think could allow this. But the evidence has been scarce, and we still don't know if this is actually what they're seeing, but some recent research focused on 9 distant galaxies that have been imaged by the Webb, and 3 of them appear to be point sources and not galaxies, despite being as bright as an entire galaxy. So this would seem to be the only way that they could really explain it. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, because if this turns out to be the real deal, this is the first direct indication of dark matter that we've had. Pretty cool, huh?
Indeed.
Up next, Interstellar Avi. Oh, Avi Loeb, you rascal. So Avi Loeb, our favorite big thinker and risk taker, is standing by his assertion that objects recovered from the ocean floor off Papua New Guinea could be of alien origin. His search for what he calls IM-1, or Interstellar Meteor 1, which we talked about last couple of weeks, involved dragging a large magnetic rake across the ocean floor off of New Guinea, and not dissimilar from what you used to use in the desert, as I recall, Geoffrey.
Quite right.
Doing so, his haul included a number of small metallic spherules, about 1 millimeter across, so not much to them, kind of like ball bearings. Loeb suggesting that they may be of artificial and perhaps interstellar origins, which is a bit of a leap, but they do come from the area where we think that meteor came in and hit the ocean. Now, this meteor was not very big. It was small, just about 1.5 feet across. It was tracked by Space Force/Air Force satellites, depending on which era they were made. And the entry path and the speeds suggest that it may have come from beyond the solar system, but this is by no means definitive. But that does make the samples more compelling. Other scientists, however, including the highly regarded Phil Metzger, who Geoffrey and I both know, of the University of Central Florida, say that the evidence just isn't there. Quote, connecting that meteor to a few tiny balls of metal taken from a vast area of ocean floor isn't a capability of the Space Command, unquote. While others contend there could be no such detritus from an exploding fireball, such as the one that kicked off Loeb's expedition, Canadian astronomer Peter Brown said, quote, there's never been a meteorite recovered from any object that hit the atmosphere moving at more than 28 kilometers a second, which is 62,600 miles per hour. And he adds that any solids that could remain would probably be aerosol size because of the speed and ferociousness of the entry. Brown also stated the government's measuring capabilities are not known in detail due to security concerns, and there's doubt that the data was sufficiently robust to prove an interstellar origin. Finally, Pennsylvania State University astronomer Jason Wright of the Penn State Extraterrestrial Intelligence Center, interesting place to work, went further, claiming that Loeb's, quote, this is a little harsh, quote, shenanigans have lately strongly changed the astronomy community's perceptions of him, unquote, and that, quote, Loeb's work is unambiguously counterproductive, alienating the community working on these problems and misinforming the public. And I love the use of the term alienating there.
Pun intended.
Kind of, yeah. I don't think the pun was intended because it was clearly a statement made in a certain amount of rancor. What do we think about this, guys? You're both involved with meteorites and asteroids and things like that. Have you been following the story?
Oh, yeah. There's a very interesting element here, and that is that, well, there are several, but one scientific thing I can point out is we do occasionally find metallic spherules related to meteorite impacts, but they're very large ones. For example, Meteor Crater in northern Arizona near Flagstaff, Harvey Neininger, the great meteorite pioneer, did extensive work there, and he determined that a very large part of the mass of the incoming meteoroid had been transformed into, at the moment of explosion, into these tiny spherules. So there is a link between spherules and meteorite impacts, but it would seem to me a very large impact on a hard target. I'm puzzled how you would get spherules at the bottom of the ocean, but you've got to admire Mr. Loeb for putting himself out there, and this is how new science is done. Taking chances and looking at possible other theories.
Well, and my feeling exactly, I'm glad you said that, because, here's a guy who basically paints a big target on his chest and then stands up in front of the science community and said, I'm going to say something that's well outside your zone of comfort here, because I've got an idea. And, it may be a bit more of a reach than some people are comfortable with. But I mean, this is how a lot of great discoveries start, is somebody kind of taking a shot. So I got a lot of admiration for him. I worked with him briefly once on a Caltech article, and he was just the nicest guy, and very humble and not out there for glory at all. I think he just really, believes and hopes that he's going to find something different. Jonathan, you got anything to add?
Well, my first inclination was to think that perhaps these were Horta eggs that had been...
No hurt eye.
Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer.
Round and nodules. So that sounded like what... But Dr. Loeb has a lot of interesting ideas. And I think it's interesting that a respected astronomer, is presenting these ideas. I don't have a comment on it. And I should probably say that if I did, it would not be the policy of the National Space Society if I did say something about it.
Oh, pshaw. We're all NSS people here. We can get away with whatever we need to. Well, I just have to say, when I read this stuff, having worked at Caltech's news and public relations branch and a few other places along those lines, I kind of feel for the folks at Harvard on the front line of PR, because, on the one hand, this is probably getting them traction like they haven't seen in decades. On the other hand, it's not always the traction you want. When it's the Daily Mirror from the UK or the Sun or the Weekly World News in the US calling for story material.
Well, they do say there's no such thing as bad publicity.
They're so wrong. There definitely is. I mean, I only invoke that quote when I make a mistake on something. I say, hey, guys, there's no bad PR. There's only PR. All right. We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Jonathan Dagle. This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by Cisco Meraki, the experts in cloud-based networking for hybrid work. Whether your employees are working at home, at a cabin in the mountains, or on a lounge chair at the beach, a cloud-managed network provides the same exceptional work experience no matter where they are. You may as well roll out the welcome mat, because hybrid work is here to stay. Hybrid work works best in the cloud and has its perks for both employees and leaders. Workers can move faster and deliver better results with a cloud-managed network, while leaders can automate distributed operations, build more sustainable workspaces, and proactively protect the network. An IDG Market Pulse research report conducted for Meraki highlights top-tier opportunities in supporting hybrid work. Hybrid work was a priority for 78% of C-suite executives. Leaders want to drive collaboration forward while staying on top of boosting productivity and security. Leaders want to drive collaboration forward while staying on top of or boosting productivity and security. Hybrid work also has its challenges, however. The IDG report raises the red flag about security, noting that 48% of leaders report cybersecurity threats as a primary obstacle to improving workforce experiences. Always-on security monitoring is part of what makes the cloud-managed network so awesome. IT can use apps from Meraki's vast ecosystem of partners, turnkey solutions built to work seamlessly with the Meraki cloud platform for asset tracking, location analytics, and more to gather insights on how people use their workspaces. In a smart space, environmental sensors can track activity and occupancy levels to stay on top of cleanliness. Also, to reserve workspaces based on vacancy and employee profiles, also called hot desking, which allows employees to quickly scout out a place to work. Locations in restricted environments can be booked in advance and include time-based door access. And mobile device management. Integrating devices and systems allow IT to manage, update, and troubleshoot company-owned devices, even when the device and employee are in a remote location. Turn any space into a place of productivity and empower your organization with the same exceptional experience no matter where they work with Meraki and the Cisco suite of technology. Learn how your organization can make hybrid work work. Visit meraki.cisco.com/twit. All right, Jonathan, this is your big moment. This is your introduction. You're an Air Force veteran. You are the policy chair and planetary defense policy manager at the National Space Society. Try putting that on a single lower third. And formerly you worked at the National Guard Bureau. What is that?
What is the National Guard Bureau? Sure. The National Guard Bureau is the organization that is part of the Department of Defense that organizes and manages the National Guards of the Army and the Navy. I'm sorry, the Army and the Air Force are the only ones that have National Guards. There is talk now about creating a Space National Guard, Space Force, being another service component, could potentially have a National Guard component as well. And the National Guard are citizen soldiers who are working part-time they have a part-time military job, and they're called up when the nation needs them. They're also very helpful often because the National Guard of the several states and territories all work for and are organized under the states, and so they report to the state governor. There's a general called the adjutant general, and anyway, so they're organized within the separate states, and then they augment the federal forces when they're called to active duty. But they can also respond in state status to disasters, or typically hurricanes is where you see them deployed a lot, or flood, or handing out candy food on the streets.
If in theory I could become a California space guardian if I wasn't over 65 and overweight, but that's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, well, they don't have a space guard yet. They're interested in creating one.
Yeah, but it just sounds so good.
It really does. Jonathan, why is there no Navy National Guard?
Well, that's because the Navy is an outward-looking entity. The National Guard really originally comes from the Army, and then the Air Force was separated from established separately. So the National Guard predates the Air Force. I don't really know how long. It goes back quite a ways. So the Air Force, having locations in the United States, whereas all of the naval forces, that wouldn't really be of use to a governor in a case of an emergency, and so they just don't have them.
We have a Coast Guard, which probably
right. The Coast Guard is similar, but that's only federal, so there is no state. Now it's interesting. There are a few states that have naval component inside their state, but it isn't a federally recognized entity.
So there's no chance you could get us on a National Guard Navy ship to go help with the search for the Dr. Loeb's material at the bottom of the ocean?
No, there's no chance.
Nice loop in. However, I will point out that I registered my boat with the Coast Guard instead of the state of California. I have to pick one or the other. And so because it's federally registered, the benefit is if I'm off the coast of Mexico or any other foreign presence, which is doubtful in my old boat that I'd get there. But if I did, it's much harder to board you because you're a federally registered and documented vessel. On the other hand, in a time of conflict, if the U.S. government shows up and says, we're taking your boat and we're going to mount a 50 caliber machine gun to the front and take it off into combat, they're allowed to do that. And frankly, I think that would be kind of cool. So I'd probably let them.
The Air Force has a similar thing called the Civil Reserve Air Fleet, the CRAF, and that is where airlines, they sign up to commit to providing airliners to be able to transport troops in case of an emergency, such as a war. And the payback is that they negotiate special rates for DoD to travel when they're not in that use. So there's that. And the thing that makes this relevant for a space podcast is that there is a lot of thought being applied to doing the same thing for space launch. And so to create a civil reserve space rocket launch, I'm not sure exactly how that would work, since most rockets are still expendable, but maybe SpaceX would be able to reuse those. Anyway, it's just something that's been talked about. I don't really know what the status of it. It's not my area of expertise.
Before we get into the meat and potatoes here, tell us about your area of expertise and assignment with the National Space Society.
Oh, sure. So
and how you got involved.
Right. So after I retired from the Air Force, I have have a technology and strategy consulting business, and so I've worked with associations to try to help them organize themselves, have a strategy that meets their goals and helps them achieve what they're trying to do. So I have always been interested in space. I was a Planetary Society member when I was very young. I don't exactly know how old. I don't have an old certificate or something. But I do remember my grandparents had given me a copy of one of Gerard O'Neill's books. It wasn't a book. It was actually just a booklet, and it had a lot of illustrations. So it had pictures of the space habitats with the cylindrical and the O'Neill cylinder and the curved ones. Anyway, so I remember all that from when I was a kid, and I never worked with space in the Air Force, mainly air operations and some war planning and some other work, and then a lot of strategy work at the Pentagon. And so when I retired, I just had an interest, and I started looking around, and I got involved with some policy activities that the Planetary Society does. They organize people to come to Washington, and through some networking, I learned that the National Space Society was doing something similar in the DC area. So my interest since I retired really had been in planetary defense. I was aware of the B612 Foundation when they were founded. I know you had Ed Lieu on here recently. And so, I gave them some money. I followed what they were doing. It was very disappointed that they couldn't get their asteroid hunting telescope launched. Right. I don't know if people are aware, but the original purpose was to try to privately fund a telescope in space that would look for asteroids. That didn't work out. Now they're doing amazing things, sort of like, which reminds me of in the Minority Report, where they have the precognition. So B612, through their ATOM program, is looking at historical observation, not historical, but past observations from telescopes. And they are able to mine that data and locate asteroids in the background. So they're finding asteroids, and if they can match up the sighting in several images or collections, then they can submit this track to the Minor Planet Center, which is where asteroids and comets are tracked, and the data for their orbits and their positions are all maintained. Anyway, so it's very exciting stuff, because just through software and some machine learning algorithms, they're able to find asteroids without actually looking in the sky for them. They just find them in data. So anyway, so I'm very interested in this, and so I started to learn and study about planetary defense, and that is an area that the National Space Society is very active in. Let's say there are three main priorities, but anyway, so I ended up becoming the leader of that policy area. We advocated for funding for the NEO Surveyor Space Telescope, which is sort of in a sense, a descendant, not directly, but related to the original B612 idea. And that telescope is on track, or was on track to be funded. And due to some budget issues, such as not passing a budget, and COVID, and some other programs that ran over budget, NASA took money away from it, which is essentially delaying the telescope by 2 years. And so we advocated for more funding to be allocated than the administration had asked for, and we were successful. I guess the Chips and Science Act more than doubled the amount of funds for NEO Surveyor that the administration had asked for. And they also included language that, not very sternly instructed NASA to pursue the telescope and launch it as quickly as they could, and not to take money away from it anymore. The good news is now that this year, the telescope has its full funding, which is about $210 million. Well, the request is that. We'll see what happens in Congress over the coming months. But this is just an area that I've always found very interesting. I guess I can still quote Bill Nye, even though I'm with the National Space Society. He says that asteroid impact is the one natural disaster that we can actually do something about. We can foresee it. We can plan for it. Potentially we can divert them, as we saw with the DART mission last year.
All right.
So that's how I got here. And then I guess they thought I did a decent job. And so then I was nominated to be the policy chair last December, or middle before. That's when I took over. And so now I manage the whole portfolio of policy issues that the National Space Society pursues. And that basically involves establishing positions and then leading up the advocacy work on the Hill. So just yesterday, I had 3 meetings on Capitol Hill with staffers from several Congressmen and women offices who are on the space subcommittee in the House of Representatives. So I have more meetings next week, and we're mainly concerned with improving circumstances for commercial space missions, companies pursuing commercial space opportunities.
Very well presented, Jonathan. I have to tell you up front that you get extra bonus points for working a Philip K. Dick reference into the show. That always gets top marks for us. I am, of course, referring to Minority Report, which was a Philip Dick story that was turned into a celebrated film. What's your favorite Philip Dick book? Put you on the spot.
Well, I do like Minority Report. I don't.
Yeah,
let me think. What did I read before? It's been a long time since I've read one of his books.
Well, you can think about
that's
that.
the best I can do. I'll work on it.
That's great. We'll come back to that.
Reading assignment.
Yes, I am a longtime supporter and fan of B612 Foundation and Asteroid Day. I was at Asteroid Day again, most recently, June 30th, and among many other fascinating people, had the pleasure of meeting Joachim Moyens, who is one of the co-creators of the asteroid finding software that you mentioned. You may know that this past Asteroid Day also coincided with the 20th anniversary of the B612 Foundation, and a new prize was unveiled, the Schweikart Prize, named after the great Rusty Schweikart of Apollo 9 fame, and he's had a marvelous career. And the purpose of this is to recognize and encourage ongoing work, research, thought around the idea of planetary defense. And very appropriately, we had a meteorite attached to the top of the prize, which was presented to Rusty in person. So first, I have a silly question for you, and then a sensible question. So in the ordinary world, in order to get the feel of a person's character, we'd go, okay, cat person, dog person. But in planetary defense, I'm going to have to ask you, Deep Impact or Armageddon? That's my silly question. You can also just pass on that.
That's like asking me to pick between tomatoes and avocados. The answer is
I have
neither.
to take Deep Impact because Armageddon is just too much.
Very good. Okay. Now, I once had the pleasure of covering the Planetary Defense Conference for NASA Edge TV and had a marvelous time. It was particularly interesting for me as a meteorite specialist to have so many impact specialists. They're people that I'd worked with in other fields. And I became quite fascinated with the wide variety of theoretical solutions to deflection of asteroids, from the aforementioned gravity tractor, which was featured in an all-original joke earlier this show, to perhaps slightly more bizarre-sounding ideas like painting one side of an asteroid. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we have the ideas of sending some sort of warhead or deflection device out there. What do you favor? Do you have? Is there a concept, Jonathan, that you think is a winner in this long-term asteroid deflection idea goal?
Well, I don't think. So I'll be careful here. So I'm smart enough to know that I don't know that much, but I'm also smart enough to know that there isn't one answer. The whole purpose, the answer to your question is it depends on the asteroid that you're trying to redirect. The impactor is very straightforward. And so that is sending a space probe with some amount of mass and velocity in to impact the asteroid. And you're just converting the mass and energy. You're taking the mass and energy of the spacecraft, and you are imparting that to the asteroid to try to change its course. You only have to change it a little bit if you have a long time before the impact. So the problem with that is that a lot of asteroids are very loosely held together. And so even as we saw in DART, there's a lot of debris created from that impactor. It was very small relatively to the asteroid, the mass of the asteroid, but it still spread out debris. In fact, there's a news story recently about they're detecting a lot of, they say, boulder-sized objects that were liberated from the asteroid Dimorphos, its target. And those pieces, some of them have escape velocity, so they will now depart the binary system of the two asteroids, and others will ultimately just sort of either stay in orbit or they'll be attracted to one of the two asteroids. So, of course, gravity tractor is probably the safest in terms of a loosely held together asteroid, because then you're using the gravity in much more subtly, let's say, than you would be with an impact. I think that the spray-on idea is actually a very interesting one. I mean, there's also an idea about so the idea is that you spray a highly absorbent a color that can either absorb or reflect the sunlight to help adjust the spin and the course, and basically the heating on the one side and the cooling on the other side is what ends up adjusting the orbit. There's another one where you use a laser to heat the surface, and you may free up some trapped water vapor, ice, turns into vapor. And that's almost like having a rocket thruster that is very slowly and slightly moving the asteroid in its orbit. So, I mean, the real answer is that there's a lot of methods, and the appropriate method depends on the situation, the circumstance of the asteroid. And so there's one of the interesting things about asteroids is that even though we detect them primarily with telescopes on the ground are very poor at characterizing the asteroid. And so part of the whole planetary defense process is you have to detect, you have to observe, and then you have to track the asteroid so that you know its orbit. And so that takes several observations to do that. Then you need to, if you want to do something about the asteroid, if it's coming toward you, you need to know something more about the asteroid. You need to know something about its rotation, because many of them are tumbling in a very unusual sort of situation. And then, most importantly, you want to know what the asteroid is made of, and what's its composition. Which ranges from very metallic, hard, rocky bodies. There's four types, three classes of asteroid, and there might be creating another one. So, and these, so it really, the only way to really characterize these is, one primary way is using a radar telescope on Earth. And the two radar telescopes, there's one in California, it's the only one that's still working. And then there was Arecibo. And of course, Arecibo in Puerto Rico, the support gave way, and the structure fell in and essentially destroyed the telescope. And it does not look like it is going to be rebuilt at this point. Problem with this is that it's very tricky to get an asteroid into position. Basically, it's waiting and chance so that you can use radar to image the asteroid. And that's the best way to determine the real, what an asteroid looks like in 3 dimensions. The other way is to go out and explore the asteroid and see what it looks like. And so in the Decadal Survey, which is the National Academies puts together a report. They do a variety of these actually, but the one that's frequently referred to is the Decadal Survey on Planetary Science and Astrobiology. That survey was put, I think that was just in 2022, it was released. and that influenced the budget somewhat. So it also endorsed the idea that Surveyor was a very important mission to get funded and launch, and it was the most important thing to do after DART was finished. The next one, next thing they said we needed to do was a rapid response mission where we could go out and detect, quickly launch a rocket to go and survey an asteroid to see if it was what it was made of. And so that was like a rehearsal for what would actually be done.
Well, I've got a whole passel of questions that I'm probably not going to get through. But before we go to those, we're going to take a quick break for a sponsor. We'll be right back. This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by Bitwarden, the only open source cross-platform password manager anywhere, anytime. Security Now's Steve Gibson is even switched over. With Bitwarden, all the data in your vault is end-to-end encrypted, not just your passwords. In the summer of 2023 G2 Enterprise Grid Report, they solidified their position as the highest performing password manager for the enterprise, leaving competitors in the dust. Bitwarden protects your data and privacy by adding strong randomly generated passwords for each account. And you can go further with the username generator, creating unique usernames for each account, or use any of the 5 integrated email alias services. Transparently view all of Bitwarden's code available on GitHub. On top of being public to the world, Bitwarden also has professional third-party audits performed yearly, and the results get published on their website. Bitwarden is open source security that you can trust. Share private data securely with coworkers across departments or the entire company with fully customizable and adaptive plans. Bitwarden's Teams organization option is only $3 per month per user, while their enterprise organization plan is just $5 per month per user. And of course, individuals always get Bitwarden's basic free account for unlimited passwords. Upgrade anytime to a premium account for less than $1 a month. Or bring the whole family with the family organization option to give up to 6 users premium features for only $3.33 a month. Bitwarden has launched its new Bitwarden Secrets Manager, which is soon coming out of beta. Secrets Manager keeps those sensitive developer secrets out of the source code and eliminates the risk of public exposure. To test out the new Secrets Manager, visit bitwarden.com/secretsbeta. Hey, at TWiT, we're fans of password managers. Get started with Bitwarden's free trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. That's bitwarden.com/twit. All right, shifting gears here, let's discuss orbital debris, because we haven't talked about that much on this show, I think, since the beta, actually. And, there's the current threat, and then there's the future threat that we're concerned about. And I think one thing that a lot of people don't necessarily understand is how dangerous even tiny things is. So we talk about how much is out there above a certain size, how much we're tracking, and I'd love to get your input on that. But just at the core, the smallest bits can be dangerous. Big ones are more dangerous, of course. So a number of years ago, a shuttle was in orbit, windshields forward. We wouldn't really call them windshields. Let's say front view screens or windows facing forward. And there was this clicking noise, and they went over to the front windows and saw that one of the 5 layers of fused quartz glass had been dinged pretty severely. Looked like it had been hit by a bullet or a BB. And the working backwards from what they found, they were able to estimate that they had been hit by a flake of paint smaller than a dime. That's just a flake of paint moving at 17,500 miles an hour in one vector or another. And it darn near took out the front layer of a shuttle window. And so if you get something much larger, and you're talking about, the space station, which has a relatively thin hull structure, or any other spacecraft, because they got to be light enough to launch, these things are dangerous. And for satellites, even more so. So maybe if you can kind of characterize the threat overall and where we are today and concerns about the future. And that's a really big question. So go for it.
That's a very large question, and this is a real problem because as we put more things into orbit, there is a challenge with deconflicting them. We have Starlink, and we have there are going to be thousands of satellites. There we have 1,000, I think. There's quite a number of satellites are going to be up there. You have competitors that are trying to do exactly the same thing, so that is just a prescription for an awful lot of satellites in low Earth orbit. So the problem with orbital debris is of course, that things that are flying around in Earth, they tend to stay flying around in Earth because they've got enough energy to stay up there. So they stay up there for a very long time, and then there's the risk of collision. And the things that are tracked in the realm of orbital debris run from as small a thing as a speck of paint, or small. It could be a nut or a bolt, some small piece,
just
component.
A bit of ice, right?
Yeah, sure. Even ice, all the way up to usually the second stage from a rocket body. There are some countries that do not seem to put a lot of effort into consideration for deorbiting these bodies. The U.S. usually does. This is actually something that some actual thought is given to. There was a object that impacted the moon. Let me think. Is that 2 years ago? And it was
about 18 months,
thought to be the third stage of an Apollo rocket, but then it turned out it was not that. It was probably a booster from a Chinese rocket.
Right. And somewhere in that conversation, they were blaming SpaceX. So it kept kind of changing assignments of what it was. Yeah.
So in the thing. But in any event, that's just it's a used rocket body that is in the Earth lunar system. And as we try to go out to the moon and build a space station there and have more activity out there, the objects all over that between the Earth and the moon are all that are orbiting this system that we inhabit. These are all going to be a problem. So interestingly, there is an act there's a proposed legislation in Congress called the Orbits Act, which is it's actually the Orbital Sustainability Act of 2023. It was introduced last year as well. It didn't go anywhere. This is only in the Senate for some reason. It hasn't gotten any traction in the House. Has to be taken up by both houses, of course, to become law. And what it does is it tasks NASA to start developing policies about to limit the orbital debris that is caused through space missions. Let's see, and it also tells NASA that they need to pursue some technology to help mitigate the kinds of debris that's already up there. So one of the concerns about space, any kind of conflict in space, is that if a satellite is damaged through an impactor, which is just like we used on DART. I mean, it's the simplest way to do something like that.
Well, what all the ASAT tests have been so far, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that would produce an incredible amount of debris, just as we saw that it did on DART. Even though it's a satellite, you're still going to produce a lot of debris. The DART impact debris is spread over hundreds of thousands of miles, whereas we're talking about stuff that's orbiting the Earth. So that if you want to leave the Earth, you have to pass through potentially some of this debris to get into space. In fact, sometimes space launches are held for the potential of orbital debris collisions, and that mission is performed. The mission of tracking all the debris in space is performed by. Now it's the U.S. Space Force. It was the Air Force. And that is being transitioned to the Department of Commerce, but it's being moved very, very slowly. And part of that is because of much like, GPS started out as a military program, and now everyone, at least most people are relying on GPS in some way. Now, there's competing Glasnost and the European Galileo, but the value that came out of being able to locate yourself, even ATM machines use the time coding from a GPS. That value is something that it was not why DoD built the GPS system, right? They said because they want to know where their airplanes were, where their bombs were going to go. So this is an economic spin-off of defense-related space spending. And so the idea is that as we have more commercial space activity, more companies going into space, we will need to this knowing where orbital debris is going to be more important to commercial entities, not just to military or NASA. And so there's a law passed to move this responsibility to the Department of Commerce. But as I said, it's moving very slowly, in part due to funding and in part just due to the complexity.
Jonathan, one of the most interesting things I've seen in my meteorite career some years ago, I was visiting an Australian colleague of mine who's a very experienced meteorite hunter and gold prospector. And in the Australian outback, he had accidentally found a titanium fuel cell that was thought to be Russian. And I was amazed by this and expounding over it. And he goes, you ain't seen nothing yet, mate. You got to look at it through the loop. So I took the magnifying glass, and the surface was pockmarked with micrometeorite impacts, perfect small craters with splash rims, showing, of course, beyond a doubt that something that's left in space for a while gets hit by micrometeorites or pieces of orbital debris or both. And this reminded me of this rather dark, almost science fiction-like concept that, in theory, if the orbital debris problem became so extreme, we as humans could possibly trap ourselves here on the Earth because you just couldn't get a spaceship past that. Is that all dark science fiction, or is there any kernel of actual worry in there?
No, there's a kernel of actual worry, as you say. Yeah, the Kessler syndrome is a real concept. There is some discussion about how bad it would be, but basically, the idea that, well, I mean, this was popularized in the movie Gravity. So the Kessler syndrome is sort of a cascading, one or more things are destroyed, and that the debris from that continues to hit more and more things. And pretty soon all that stuff largely stays up there because it's already orbiting the Earth, and so it has enough velocity to stay up. And as you break it up into smaller pieces, those pieces are going to continue to orbit the Earth at the same speed for a very long time. There's a lot of factors, physics to address there, and for each piece, but they'll stay up there for a very long time. As I mentioned before, rocket launches are sometimes adjusted because of orbital debris. The International Space Station is moved into a higher orbit or into a lower orbit because of a potential to collide with orbital debris. I was just looking up. As of 2 years ago, there were more than 23,000 pieces of debris that are tracked, each one followed, that are larger than the size of about a softball. And all of those are spinning around. I mean, you talk about the impact of a fleck of paint on your spacecraft. If something the size of a softball were to hit you at orbital velocities, that would be the end of that. It would be catastrophic failure. So, yeah, it's a very real problem. And so companies are very concerned about this, not just astronauts and people flying into space, but, it's expensive to put assets into space. And in low Earth orbit, this is really where the problem is. It's a little less of a problem out at geostationary orbit because it's a bigger sphere of area where where the satellites are. I'm not saying that it is not a concern, but the majority of the stuff that's a real problem is closer down. And as we launch more satellites to perform different missions in lower Earth orbit, the potential for problem is going to increase. And so it's not just a function of the debris, but as you get more and more satellites and objects in orbit, it becomes what's called an issue of space traffic management. And just like an airport needs to have air traffic control for the aircraft that are landing so they can safely land without hitting each other, you have to manage the positions in orbits so that there isn't a conflict. And so you have orbit a satellite at a given orbit, say it's at 100 miles, let's say it's 200 miles. Anyway, it's going around and it might have an orbit in one direction, and there might be other satellites in a similar orbit that are going in a different direction. And there's a potential for collision. I mean, so the idea is space seems like it's very big, and it is very big. But a lot of the things that you want to do tend to be in the same locations. So the place that SpaceX wants to put, it has its Starlink satellites. That's the same place that the other companies would like to be there.
All right. Well, we're going to come back in one moment and talk about mediation after this short break. I have been corrected. It's I think it's mediation. But anyway, dealing with those critters. So we've got this big cloud of junk that's orbiting the Earth, and 99.999% of it is stuff we don't like. In terms of numbers, if not mass. So what are some of the suggestions on how to deal with this? Either clean it up or deorbit it, or perhaps my favorite solution, which is probably also the most unlikely, is repurpose it, since a lot of it's metal and it's already up there.
Well, this is a burgeoning area of research and development, right? So there are a lot of ideas. So much like planetary defense, there are great ideas, and except for DART, we haven't tried any of them out. We haven't really tried out any of these ideas for the orbital debris. One, let's start with the easiest option. So there is also an idea called in-service or on-orbit. I've said the wrong thing.
I'll get it, ladies and gentlemen.
How's it called?
It's there somewhere.
It's on-orbit servicing. Okay, well, all right. So,
yeah.
You can,
Basically gas stations in orbit. Yeah.
Well, you have, there is an idea of servicing satellites that are in space, and these satellites you would approach with another spacecraft, and that spacecraft would then be able to access it, to repair it, service it, refuel it, etc. So this is an area where commercial companies are very interested in doing that because it extends the life of a satellite. But the same technology could be used to attach a thruster that would help to deorbit something very large. So this works with something like a second stage that's tumbling around. That's another issue, is actually arresting the tumbling of these things. But if you can get close to it when you could attach something to deorbit, whether it's a thruster or perhaps even a better idea is, so there was the solar sail, the satellite that the Planetary Society had, Light Sail 2, sailed around the Earth using energy from the sun, solar winds, to keep it in orbit. So the same thing can be done in reverse. You can use essentially a very large sail that creates drag. And so if you can attach this to some materials in space, then a spacecraft or something, the drag, this sail could create drag that would help the object re-enter the atmosphere more quickly. Another way that on-orbit servicing can address the problem of derelict satellites is they can be potentially repurposed. And so the materials that are on a satellite, instead of just burning them up, if they could be collected and then repurposed, that is a much more sustainable approach to using resources or using assets in space than just discarding everything and having it burn up in the atmosphere. A slightly more interesting idea, perhaps, is there are ideas of using some sort of a glue or a mesh, a large mesh-like structure that could capture the high-speed small particles. So, like pieces of paint or very small pieces of a satellite that's come apart, or just parts of a rocket stage that are floating around. They could be embedded in sort of a gooey resin, and then that would be able to be burned up in the atmosphere and take those out of the orbit.
Okay, well, that sounds very promising. I know there's a number of technologies that have also been looked at in terms of using electromagnetic tethers and things of that nature. But I think Geoffrey has something he wants to show us.
I do. I also wish we could use some of these technologies that Jonathan's describing to catch meteorites. That would be great for me. So, Jonathan, I'd like to step back to an earlier topic we discussed. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, oh, well, what's the relevance of studying meteorites? Why should anyone care? One of the most important reasons, in my opinion, and for planetary defense. We know that most meteorites originated on asteroids. So if we understand the makeup of meteorites that we recover, we get a pretty good idea of the makeup of the asteroids they come from. And so I wanted to show you this. Apologize for people who are listening only, but this is a mesosiderite. This is a stony iron meteorite.
It's a polished slice, correct?
Yes, it is. Well done, Rod. Full polished slice, highly reflective, as you can see. Now, this is made up of a mixture not only of silicate stony material and nickel iron material, but evidently different materials from different sources. Wow. So this is a real hodgepodge. It's a strange kind of breccia. And so if we were to try and break apart a potentially dangerous asteroid, it'd be extremely helpful for us to know its makeup. And if the threatening body were, say, an iron meteorite, we might treat that very differently from a stony meteorite, or a stony iron meteorite, such as this one is, we imagine, more friable, more brittle. And if you think back to the famous Chelyabinsk fireball seen over Russia in February of 2013, that meteorite broke up into thousands of pieces, most of them very small. And when you look at a slice, you see why. It looks like compressed gravel. It's little pieces jammed together into a breccia. So by studying meteorites and their makeup, we get a very good idea of the makeup of some asteroids, and that could really help us in the long term. Do you concur?
Yeah, absolutely. I concur. Right. So that's a very important point I was making similarly earlier, was that you need to know what the asteroid consists of before you can begin any effort to deflect the thing. The good news is, of course, that there are no known asteroids on a collision course with the Earth. The bad news is that NASA estimates that we only know about we only have located about 48%, 46% of the potentially hazardous near-Earth asteroids that are larger than 140 meters across. And that size is sort of a approximation for a size that would cause regional devastation. So something that would, could destroy pretty much the area of a state, a small state, perhaps even a larger area, and it probably would have significant impacts well beyond the actual impact site.
Agreed.
So we can't protect your city or your county, but we could probably sense and at least consider doing something about something that would take your state out. That's good to know. Geoffrey, you prompted a question in my mind, which is, what's the minimum bid on that thing you just held up?
Gosh, Rod, I don't actually know. 6 or 7 inches across. I to be honest, I didn't even think it's hit its opening bid yet. This is a very unusual mesosiderite. Was found in Northwest Africa a few years ago. Really unusual because of the large spherical nickel iron inclusions. But anyone who's interested, just go to meteorites.link and you can see them all. That's where my life's work, my meteorite collection is up at auction. Some very interesting pieces of representing all the different meteorite groups, and quite a few that I found myself back in the high adventuring days of Meteorite Men. Meteorites.link.
Well, and speaking of things, large things whacking into the Earth, I believe Jonathan has somewhere he wants us to take a peek.
Yeah. To think about asteroids hitting the Earth, there's a fascinating site from the Imperial College in London called the Earth Impact Effects Program. And you can then punch in there your desired size and type of asteroid and the velocity at which it impacts the Earth. And you can find out what happens to it and how big a hole it makes and how much destruction there is. It's very enlightening because one of the most obvious things is that the composition of the asteroid makes a big difference. Some of these asteroids, much like Chelyabinsk, Chelyabinsk, the asteroids can blow up in the atmosphere and never create a crater, but they can do incredible damage. So the idea that that there are a lot of craters. I think there are more than almost 200 known impact structures where geologically they can show that the structure is created by an asteroid impact. Some of them are quite large. Some of them go back many millions of years, more than 66 million years. But that's only the known asteroids. The known, those are the craters that were caused, right? So there were other things that hit the Earth and burned up in the atmosphere and exploded with incredible force that could cause death or injury. But we don't have any record of them because there would be no lasting evidence on the surface.
Yeah, and the Earth is really bad about preserving things like that, as opposed to the backside of the moon, which is very instructive when you're talking about impact events. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for joining us today for a peek under the hood of some space-related areas of concern, if not interest. Jonathan, where can we keep up with your activities?
Well, you can go to the National Space Society website at nss.org. You can look me up on Twitter. LinkedIn. I'm really not active on Twitter right now. You can look for me, but you won't see anything. Jonathan Dagle at LinkedIn.
All right. And Geoffrey, where can we keep track of you and keep a much needed eye on that auction?
Oh, thanks, Rod. Well, I'm, as we would say in England, rather chuffed. That means very pleased that our great friends at space.com released an article that I wrote today. And it is about my life and work in meteorites. That's just new release on space.com. And for more information about my collection of space rocks up for sale, of which a large part of the proceeds will be donated to kids and education charities, just go to meteorites.link. And other than that, I'm real easy to find on social media at Jeff Notkin with a G.
Well, just so it's said, I'm still paying some bills off for my my graduate experience at Stanford. So if you want to aim some of that charity this way, I will use it in an educational manner. Just kidding, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, you can always find me at pylebooks.com and at astromagazine.com. Don't forget to drop us a line at TWIS at TWiT TV. That's TWIS at TWiT TV. We welcome your comments, suggestions, and ideas, and answer each and every email. Also, don't forget to check out space.com. The website's the name, and the National Space Society, which is also, as you now know, keenly interested in planetary defense and orbital debris at nss.org or space.nss.org. Both are good places to satisfy your spaceflight cravings. New episodes published every Friday on your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, gives us thumbs up and reviews and big smiles. We'll take whatever you got. You can also head to our website at twit.tv/twis. And don't forget, you can get all the great programming on the TWiT network ad-free on Club TWiT, as well as some extras that are only available there for just $7 a month. You can't beat that for value. You can also follow the TWiT Tech Podcast Network at TWiT on Twitter and on Facebook and twit.tv on Instagram. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Oh, hey, that's a really nice iPhone you have there. You totally picked the right color. Hey, since you do use an iPhone and maybe use an iPad or an Apple Watch or an Apple TV, well, you should check out iOS Today. It's a show that I, Micah Sargent, and my co-host Rosemary Orchard host every Tuesday right here on the TWiT network. It covers all things iOS, tvOS, HomePodOS, watchOS, iPadOS. It's all the OSs that Apple has on offer, and we love to give you tips and tricks about making the most of those devices, checking out great apps and services, and answering your tech questions. I hope you check it out.